Close your eyes and imagine the year is 1327. The world is harsher, smaller, yet brimming with the raw pulse of life. Smoke curls from chimneys, mingling with the morning fog, stinging eyes and lungs. The village stirs slowly. Chickens cluck in the straw, a dog barks. A cart creaks over the uneven dirt road, and inside a thatched cottage, a mother labors, every breath heavy with pain. Childbirth in this era is a gamble, a confrontation with death for both mother and child. There are no sterile instruments, no anesthesia, no comforting nurses, only faith, skill honed by decades of repetition, and the midwife's quiet hands stained by years of toil. The air is thick with sweat and incense, a mixture meant to ward off evil spirits and soothe the frantic family. The infant arrives into the world with a cry that cuts through the smoke and dim candlelight. Wrapped tightly in coarse linen, the baby's tiny limbs are immobilized, believed necessary to prevent weakness. Parents exhale, relief and fear colliding. Half the children born in this era will never see their 5th birthday. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and fevers lurk invisibly, ready to snatch life without warning. Within hours, the baby is taken to the village church, a simple building of stone, echoing with chants and prayers, its wooden pews cold under small knees. Baptism is urgent. Without it, the church teaches, the soul cannot enter heaven. The priest pours holy water over the infant's head. Latin words float through the air like invisible threads, claiming this child for God. In that moment, the baby is not just part of a family, it is part of a larger divine tapestry, bound by ritual and belief. Life at home is stark. Most families dwell in a single-room hut, sharing the floor with animals and siblings alike. Straw is everywhere, bedding, insulation, a soft but unhygienic foundation. Rats and fleas scuttle in the corners. Smoke from the central fire drifts upward, searing eyes, filling lungs. Yet, this is home, the only world the infant will know for months, perhaps years, of fragile survival. Days pass in a blur of feeding, crying, and whispered prayers. Wet nurses may be hired if the mother is weak or unable to nurse. Every meal, every swaddle, every lullaby carries the weight of survival. The family learns quickly that joy and fear are inseparable companions in the cradle. Every smile, every breath, every heartbeat is precious. Even the youngest life is shaped by the medieval world's demands. By the age of 3, the child toddles across dirt floors, bare feet hardened by the cold, hands reaching for whatever curiosity tempts them. Wooden toys, rudimentary dolls, and simple games fill a few stolen moments of innocence. Play is brief. The child is expected to observe, imitate, and eventually contribute. Boys may follow fathers to the field. Girls trail mothers to the well. Chores begin early, and the weight of responsibility sits quietly on their small shoulders. But danger lurks everywhere. Fires burn constantly in the center of huts. Wells are deep and treacherous. Animals are strong and unpredictable. Even minor wounds can fester, and disease moves silently, claiming the unaware. Life is not a guarantee. Survival is a miracle measured day by day. Yet, amid the fear and fragility, there are whispers of wonder. Spring brings wildflowers and buzzing bees. Wooden hoops roll down dusty roads. Stones skip across ponds, water splashing on eager fingers. Shadows stretch long at dusk, and laughter, though fleeting,
echoes like a fragile song against the relentless drum of hardship. By age 5, the child is no longer purely innocent. Chores are expected. A boy carries water or guides an ox. A girl sweeps, fetches, tends animals, learns to grind grain. Early childhood ends swiftly, replaced by the apprenticeship of survival. Every day is a negotiation with fate, each step on muddy paths a challenge, each breath a triumph. And yet, even here, in the shadow of mortality, the first stirrings of community, faith, and belonging emerge. The church bells mark the rhythm of days, prayers punctuate meals, and festivals, rare and bright, offer fleeting relief. Life is harsh, but it is also lived fully, intimately, unavoidably. In this cradle of struggle, the journey of a medieval life begins. Every heartbeat, every tear, every small victory shapes the path ahead. A path that will wind through childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and eventually the inevitable approach of death. By the time a child reaches 6 or 7, the world has grown larger, sharper, and more demanding. The novelty of infancy fades, replaced by an awareness of rules, duties, and dangers. Every day is a lesson in survival. Mud clings to bare feet. Tools are heavy for small hands. The sun burns on exposed skin, while rain soaks through woolen tunics, and the chill bites deep when winter arrives. Education is uneven, shaped by status and circumstance. For most peasant children, the first letters may never be learned. Reading and writing are luxuries. Instead, knowledge comes from watching, imitating, and absorbing the rhythms of labor. Boys learn to handle plows, dig ditches, carry water, and manage animals. Girls master the spinning wheel, grind grain, fetch firewood, and tend to younger siblings. Every small task is part of a larger lesson. Contribute, endure, survive. Danger is constant. Wells claim the curious, carts crush the unwary, fires burn without mercy. A scraped knee can fester, a cough can turn deadly. Families accept these losses with grim regularity. Funerals are not distant ceremonies, but frequent, intimate reminders of mortality. Each small grave is a silent testament. Life is fleeting. Death waits in every corner. Yet within this harshness, childhood flickers with wonder. Spring brings the bloom of wildflowers, and children chase bees or gather herbs for remedies their mothers prepare. Festivals break the monotony. Easter, Christmas, harvest gatherings, moments when the village dances, sings, and feasts together. Boys pretend to joust with sticks. Girls braid each other's hair, and laughter rings, fragile but alive. The church is central. By age 7, children are taught that sin exists even in their smallest actions. They learn prayers, attend Mass, and kneel on cold stone floors, listening to sermons about angels, demons, and eternal fire. Discipline is harsh. Wooden rods, leather straps, and shouted reprimands shape behavior. Love and fear are intertwined, as parents and priests seek to mold the child's body, mind, and soul. Apprenticeships often begin in late childhood. By 8 or 9, boys may be sent to live with a master craftsman, learning blacksmithing, carpentry, or weaving. Girls might work with a mistress, perfecting embroidery, cooking, or midwifery. The world of play becomes interwoven with labor. Every lesson, every scrape, every triumph shapes a life that must survive, contribute, and endure. Health remains fragile. Fevers, smallpox, measles, and unknown ailments sweep through villages with terrifying speed. Even the strongest child can be struck down. Families accept these dangers quietly. Loss is personal, intimate, and constant. Grief is a familiar companion. Yet children who survive gain resilience, learning early that life is precious, that every day is a small victory against forces beyond comprehension. Friendships, too, take root. The child's peers are comrades and allies. Shared work, shared games, and shared fears bond them tightly. Lessons of loyalty, courage, and cunning are learned in mud-streaked fields, along narrow streets, and in whispered secrets behind straw walls. Bonds forged in hardship are stronger than any education, shaping character in ways that scrolls and sermons never could. By age 10, the child begins to understand the broader social order. Lords and ladies, priests and peasants, merchants and beggars. The world is layered and rigid. Each person has a role, and deviation can bring punishment. Boys dream of knighthood, girls dream of noble marriages, but the reality is grounded in labor, obedience, and survival. Dreams are measured against the weight of the world, teaching ambition, patience, and cunning. Illnesses that once might have been mere inconveniences are now dangerous. A simple wound festers, a cough can spread plague. Families keep herbs close, prayers closer, and charms closer still. Survival is never guaranteed, but the child who adapts, who learns, and who observes stands a chance to grow into adolescence, a stage where responsibility, danger, and duty intensify even further.
Yet even amidst labor, danger, and the omnipresent shadow of death, life is alive. Every laugh, every small victory, every festival, every moment of discovery is savored because it is fleeting. The medieval child learns early that existence is fragile but precious, and that the bonds of family, faith, and community are the threads that hold it together. By the end of this stage, childhood begins to slip away. The world grows larger, heavier, and more demanding. Innocence is replaced by expectation. Play gives way to duty. Observation becomes apprenticeship. And the child, once swaddled and fragile, now stands at the threshold of adolescence, a time where the stakes rise, and every choice, every action, becomes part of the relentless story of survival in the medieval era. By the time a child reaches 11, the world has already begun to press heavily upon them. Childhood, once a delicate cocoon, has dissolved into expectation. Hands that were once small and soft are now calloused from work. Feet that ran freely through meadows are hardened by stone and mud. Every day is a test, a challenge to endure, learn, and survive. Adolescence in the medieval era is not a time of discovery as we imagine it. It is a time of responsibility, labor, and preparation for roles society demands. Boys are expected to be strong, able to wield tools, herd animals, and defend their families if danger arises. Girls are tasked with mastering the household, learning to spin, bake, cook, and care for siblings. Every action has consequence. Every misstep can bring punishment, illness, or even death. The body changes rapidly. Boys grow taller, shoulders broaden, and strength emerges from labor. Girls begin menstruation, a physical sign that the world now expects them to bear children. Marriage, no longer a distant dream, becomes a practical consideration. Families plan, negotiate, and sometimes barter for futures long before their children are ready to understand the weight of such arrangements. Education, for those who have it, is sparse but rigorous. Latin prayers, church doctrine, and basic numeracy fill long hours. Apprenticeships intensify. Boys bound to a blacksmith or carpenter rise before dawn, stoke fires, sharpen blades, and labor alongside their master. Mistakes are punished with harsh strokes, rewards rare. Girls learning under a mistress practice embroidery, manage food, and prepare for the household labor that will dominate their adult lives. Knowledge is practical. Knowledge is survival.
Danger grows with age. Open fires, sharp tools, heavy animals, and slippery streets make every day a careful negotiation. Illness is constant. Fevers, plagues, and injuries take no prisoners. Adolescents witness death closely now. Friends, neighbors, and siblings fall suddenly. They are taught early that life is fragile, fleeting, and to be respected. The church remains central. Adolescents learn morality, sin, and the path to salvation. Confession becomes frequent, sermons long and fearsome. The threat of hell, the promise of heaven, and the invisible weight of God's gaze shape choices and actions. Mistakes are sins. Sins require penance. Penance ensures survival beyond this life. Fear and faith intertwine, teaching obedience, discipline, and caution.
Adulthood arrives swiftly. By 17, the world no longer whispers its demands, it shouts. Responsibility is immediate, unrelenting, and absolute. Every day carries weight. The fields, the hearth, the family, the church, and the looming shadow of death. Adolescence, with its fleeting freedom, is gone. Life has sharpened into duty and survival. Marriage often comes early. For peasants, it is practical. Alliances, shared labor, and survival dictate choice more than affection. A young man marries a woman whose hands are skilled with a spindle, whose back is strong enough to till fields alongside him. A young woman marries a man who can protect, provide, and endure hardship. Romantic love exists, but it is fragile, often overshadowed by need, circumstance, and tradition. Among the nobility, marriage is a matter of strategy. Daughters are promised to secure alliances, sons married to strengthen dynasties. Bodies are given, futures decided, long before hearts fully understand. Work defines every hour. A man rises before dawn, the air cold and biting. The plow cuts through damp earth, the oxen strain against the yoke, and sweat beads his brow. He plants, he harvests, he repairs, he fights. A woman wakes with equal diligence, tending children, preparing food, spinning wool, baking bread, and managing the household. Each task is crucial. Failure can mean hunger, illness, or loss of status. Life is measured in labor, every action a thread woven into survival. Illness and injury are ever-present threats. Cuts fester, fevers rage, and childbirth carries mortal risk. Women bear children in rooms lit by candles, aided only by midwives, whose hands are skilled but powerless against all dangers. Men face the field, the forge, and the battlefield. Every wound, every fever, every misstep could end life or cripple it permanently. Survival is both a miracle and a routine struggle.
It saturates adult life. Sundays are for Mass. Holy days mark time with feasts and prayers. Confession is frequent, absolution a necessity.
The church does not merely guide, it governs morality, labor, and law. Fear of sin, of purgatory, and of divine wrath shapes decisions constantly. Even in moments of joy, weddings, festivals, harvest celebrations, faith is never distant. It is a compass, a burden, and a source of hope all at once. Parenthood adds weight to life. Children are born, fragile and precious. Mortality is high. Half may not survive infancy. Yet the joy of their cries, the first steps, the small triumphs, reminds adults why endurance matters. Parents teach skills, morals, prayers, and survival techniques, molding the next generation in a world that demands strength, obedience, and cunning. Fathers guide sons in labor and defense. Mothers teach daughters in household management and child rearing. Each day is a lesson in life and in survival. The shadow of war never fully recedes. Men may be conscripted into militias, summoned by lords or called to defend their homes. Spears, swords, and armor bring glory for some, death for most. Blood, screams, and fire are familiar companions. Women remain, tending homes, gardens, and livestock, praying for the safe return of fathers, brothers, and husbands. Life is uncertain, and courage is demanded at every turn. Joy is fleeting, but profound. Festivals erupt with song, dance, and ale. Lovers steal moments beneath trees, behind barns, or on quiet pathways. Music drifts through villages as minstrels travel, stories unfold, and laughter rings briefly before work resumes. The contrast between hardship and celebration sharpens life's intensity, making every joy more vivid, every sorrow more profound.
By 35, adulthood has left its mark. Faces show toil, hands bear calluses, backs ache, and eyes have witnessed sorrow. Life has been tested by famine, disease, childbirth, labor, and war. Those who endure carry resilience, skill, and wisdom. They know loss intimately. They know survival intimately. They understand life is fragile, precious, and brutally demanding. Yet within this struggle, there is meaning. Family bonds, faith, and labor form a web of existence. Every crop sown, every child taught, every prayer whispered, every act of endurance contributes to the ongoing tapestry of life. The adult years are defined not by comfort, but by the balance of duty, love, and survival. Life is a series of choices, sacrifices, and relentless effort, and those who navigate it emerge tempered, hardened, and aware of both mortality and the profound beauty of human endurance. Middle adulthood in the medieval era is a time both feared and revered. By 36, few have escaped the toll of life's relentless demands. The body, once resilient, begins to betray its owner. Backs stiffen from decades of bending over fields or tools. Hands are gnarled and cracked. Joints ache, and simple movements bring reminders of labor endured. Teeth are often gone or rotted, leaving meals painful. Eyes dim, ears dull, and fatigue settles deeper with each passing season. Life has left its marks, visible and hidden, etched into bones, muscles, and spirit alike. Responsibility reaches a new intensity. Children born in youth are approaching adulthood themselves. Sons may be ready to inherit tools, fields, or responsibilities. Daughters are learning the household arts or preparing for marriage. Parents in this stage become anchors of entire households, guiding, teaching, and sometimes enforcing rules with firmness born of experience. Their lives are no longer just their own. They are intertwined with the survival and success of the next generation.
Labor continues, though often adapted. A peasant man may no longer plow entire fields, but oversees work, tends livestock, repairs homes, and manages apprentices or younger siblings. A woman, no longer bearing children as frequently, remains central to household survival. Spinning, weaving, cooking, caring for grandchildren, and preserving knowledge of herbs, remedies, and prayers. Work is endless, yet necessity sharpens skills, endurance, and foresight. The shadow of famine and disease looms larger. Harvests may fail, droughts scorch, and winters bite. Illnesses that were once minor, fevers, coughs, wounds, now threaten life. The Black Death has scarred Europe, leaving empty homes, silent fields, and grief that never fully dissipates. Adults in this period witness neighbors, friends, and sometimes even children taken swiftly. They live with mortality close at hand, a constant, quiet companion. Faith, already central, deepens further. Prayer is routine, confession frequent. Every action, every sacrifice is weighed in terms of salvation. Pilgrimages are undertaken when possible. Alms are given, indulgence is purchased, and church attendance is unwavering. Life is lived in preparation for death as much as in the pursuit of survival. The fear of purgatory is real, and the hope of heaven sustains courage amid hardship. Love and joy are tempered by realism. Spouses, partners, and families endured together, weathering storms of hunger, sickness, and war. Festivals, weddings, and seasonal feasts bring moments of light, laughter, and connection. Music, storytelling, and occasional leisure provide respite, if only briefly. These small joys are amplified precisely because life is so often harsh, uncertain, and cruel.
Wisdom grows alongside weariness. Adults in middle age become the memory keepers of their communities. They recall past famines, outbreaks, and battles. They know which herbs heal, which alliances protect, and which debts to avoid. Villagers, younger neighbors, and even lords may seek counsel from these seasoned individuals, respecting experience and endurance. Knowledge becomes a kind of power, tempered by humility, forged by survival. Loss is constant, yet resilience remains. Siblings, friends, and sometimes children are lost to the elements, disease, or violence. The pain is personal, raw, and familiar. Grief is endured silently or through ritual, prayers, masses, and careful tending of graves. Life in middle adulthood is a balancing act, maintaining hope, supporting family, and preparing for the inevitable approach of old age. As years advance toward 50, bodies continue to slow, but the spirit adapts. The adult learns to delegate, to teach, to anticipate dangers, to guide rather than only labor. Every season survived is a triumph. Every child grown or apprenticed is a mark of accomplishment. The middle adult is both warrior and caretaker, laborer and advisor, living testament to human endurance and tenacity. Even amid hardship, the sense of legacy sharpens. Knowledge, skills, and wisdom are shared. Stories of survival, courage, and faith are passed down to children and grandchildren. The community sees the middle adult as a bridge, a link between the past and future, a living example of perseverance in a world ruled by uncertainty.
Middle adulthood is not a quiet time. It is fraught with labor, loss, vigilance, and care. Yet it is also a stage of insight, where survival is no longer merely physical, but mental, and spiritual. It is a period where endurance becomes mastery. Mastery over the body's weaknesses, over the household's demands, and over the relentless shadow of mortality that looms over every day. To reach late adulthood in the medieval era was a feat few could claim. By 50, the body is a map of every struggle, every hardship endured. Backs bend permanently from decades of labor. Hands are cracked, calloused, and gnarled. Joints ache with every step. Teeth, long gone or rotted, make every meal a test of patience. Eyes dim, vision clouded by years of sun and smoke. Breathing comes in shallow gasps after even modest exertion. Life has demanded much, and the body carries the evidence of that debt. Labor continues, though carefully measured. A man may no longer plow the fields sunrise to sunset, but he tends gardens, repairs structures, manages livestock, and oversees the work of younger family members. A woman, past the age of childbearing, spins, bakes, cooks, and manages the household, guiding grandchildren and passing down vital knowledge of herbs, remedies, and survival skills. Even in the twilight years, work is a necessity, and idleness is a luxury few can afford.
Loss is an unrelenting companion. Spouses, siblings, friends, and sometimes children have already passed. The Black Death, famine, war, and disease have left their marks, and graves line the churchyard as reminders of mortality. Faith, once a gentle guide, now becomes a fortress. Prayers, pilgrimages, and alms are not only acts of devotion, but lifelines for peace in the afterlife. Every action, every decision is shadowed by the inevitability of death. Even amid hardship, there are moments of light. Grandchildren bring laughter, hope, and the promise of continuity. Weddings, festivals, and harvest feasts offer celebration, laughter, and music, if only fleeting. Storytelling around hearths preserves history and culture, passing lessons of survival, courage, and morality to those who follow. These small joys are amplified because life has been long, arduous, and uncertain. Health becomes fragile. Illnesses that were once minor are now threats to life. Fevers, infections, and respiratory ailments can overwhelm weakened bodies in days. Even surviving a harsh winter is an achievement. Those who live into late adulthood are often revered for their endurance, wisdom, and miraculous survival. Communities look to them as living histories, keepers of knowledge and memory. Faith dominates these years more than ever. Confession, prayer, and ritual become daily necessities. Fear of purgatory and the afterlife guides decisions and behavior. Some elders retreat entirely to monasteries or convents, devoting their remaining years to God. Others remain active in the community, guiding households, mediating disputes, and maintaining traditions, blending survival, wisdom, and piety into every action.
Death is never far from mind. Some perish suddenly, accidents, infections, or lingering illnesses. Others endure a slow decline, their days measured in weakness, pain, and preparation for the inevitable. Families gather to administer last rites, whisper prayers, and ensure that the soul's journey is attended according to faith. The shadow of mortality shapes every moment, yet life continues as both necessity and ritual. Legacy becomes central. Land, tools, and skills are passed on. Stories, warnings, and lessons are shared. Elders become the living memory of their villages, carrying knowledge of famine, war, plague, and survival. Their lives testify to endurance, resilience, and the unbroken thread of human perseverance. The wisdom of late adulthood is as vital as physical strength once was. It is guidance, it is protection, and it is hope for the future. Late adulthood is a time of reflection, care, and preparation. It is both an end and a bridge, connecting one generation to the next. The trials of survival, the joys of family, and the omnipresence of mortality shape every act, every prayer, every moment of awareness. Those who endure into this stage witness the full spectrum of medieval existence: birth, growth, labor, love, loss, and the quiet approach of the grave.
Reaching 70 in the medieval era is almost miraculous. Few lived this long, and those who did carry every memory of survival in their bodies, every scar, every ache, every line etched into skin. Old age is a time of both reverence and vulnerability. Villagers see these elders as living histories, witnesses to centuries of toil, famine, war, and plague. They are honored for wisdom, yet feared as fragile reminders of mortality. The body falters, bones creak with every movement, joints swell painfully, eyes and ears fade, walking becomes slow and deliberate. Meals are soft and small, often just broth or porridge, because teeth have long been lost. Even the simplest tasks demand energy that is rarely abundant. Yet the mind, if kept sharp, becomes a powerful instrument. Memory, experience, and insight guide households, councils, and sometimes entire villages. The elders' counsel is sought in disputes, marriages, and matters of survival. Daily life in these years is a balance between preservation and purpose. Many elders tend small gardens, maintain tools, mend nets, or weave cloth. Others devote themselves fully to guiding the young, teaching skills, and passing on the stories of their lives. Grandchildren cling to them, absorbing tales of hardship, courage, and faith, unaware that they are being given more than stories. They are being given a map for survival.
Health is fragile, and death never far. Minor ailments become life-threatening. Fevers, infections, and respiratory illnesses can strike suddenly. A fall, a cut, or even exhaustion from a winter's cold may prove fatal. Families prepare for this inevitability. Priests are summoned to offer last rites, candles are lit, and prayers rise in solemn tones. The dying are surrounded by love, ritual, and the hope of divine mercy. Faith dominates every moment. The Church's influence reaches its peak. Confession, prayer, indulgences, and pilgrimages are not just spiritual acts, but lifelines for the soul. Fear of purgatory and judgment shapes daily life. Elders often spend hours in prayer, seeking forgiveness and peace, while also instructing the young on moral conduct, devotion, and the importance of salvation. The final days are solemn. Breath becomes shallow, the body weakens. Families gather close, whispering prayers, recounting memories, and attending to comfort. The priest performs the last rites, confession, anointing, and the Eucharist, offering spiritual sustenance for the journey ahead. Eyes close, hands relax, and the soul is believed to depart, carried by angels or confronted by divine judgment. Burial follows, steeped in ritual. The body is wrapped in linen or wool, carried to the churchyard, and laid to rest with prayers, holy water, and often a blessing for eternity. Simple graves mark the resting places of peasants, while nobles may be interred within church walls or elaborate tombs. Masses are held, candles burned, and alms given for the soul's repose, ensuring that the deceased remains in the memory and prayers of the living.
Old age is also a time of reflection. Every life is measured not just in years, but in endurance, choices, and legacy. Land, tools, wisdom, and faith are passed down. The stories of survival, enduring famine, war, disease, and the constant uncertainty of life become lessons embedded in the culture of the next generation. The elder's death is not an end, but a continuation of influence, shaping lives long after the body has returned to the earth. Death in the medieval world is both feared and accepted. It is the ultimate certainty, a final reckoning, and a passage to eternity. Life was harsh, unpredictable, and often short. But those who reach its final stage embody resilience, perseverance, and the unbroken spirit of humanity. The cycle closes, and the story of one life folds into the tapestry of generations, a reminder that survival, memory, and faith endure beyond the grave. Even as graves are dug and bells toll, life continues. Children grow, crops are sown, festivals celebrated, and prayers rise for the living and the dead alike. Each life, from birth to death, contributes to the eternal rhythm of the medieval world, where existence was fragile, fleeting, and yet profoundly meaningful.
Even after death, the story of life in the medieval era lingers in whispers, in stone, in the patterns of work and worship that define every village and town. Those who survived from birth to old age left behind not just bodies, but memories, lessons, and traditions. Their lives were small miracles in a world ruled by uncertainty, where famine, plague, war, and hardship constantly threatened to erase their existence. Each life was a thread in the larger tapestry of the era. The peasant who bent over fields from dawn to dusk ensured the survival of a family and the continuity of the harvest. The craftsman who apprenticed a boy or girl imparted skills that would echo for generations. The healer who tended the sick and delivered babies shaped the physical and spiritual health of the community. Even the nobles and clergy, whose power shaped kingdoms, were ultimately caught in the same fragile web of mortality, bound by politics, disease, and faith. In reflecting on a life lived fully in these times, one realizes that survival itself was an achievement. Every birthday reached beyond infancy was a triumph. Every meal gathered, every crop harvested, every child raised, and every prayer said was a battle won. And yet, survival was inseparable from suffering. Joy and pain, hope and fear, life and death intertwined so closely that one could not exist without the other. The lessons of medieval life are stark but powerful. They remind us that human resilience is not born from comfort, but from adversity. Communities formed strong bonds because dependence on neighbors was essential. Faith, while sometimes wielded as a tool of control, also offered solace and meaning amidst chaos. And in every hardship, from a harsh winter to the Black Death, the medieval person learned to persist, to adapt, and to hope, even in the shadow of death.
Legacy in this era was measured differently than today. It was not wealth or fame that endured, but survival, knowledge, and memory. Families preserved the wisdom of the old through stories, work habits, and devotion to faith. Villages remembered the heroes who defended them, the midwives who saved lives, and the elders who guided generations. Noble legacies were carved in stone and chronicled in manuscripts, but the essence of life's impact was the quiet endurance of ordinary people whose daily struggles kept society functioning against impossible odds. Even death carried lessons. Burial practices, prayers, and rituals reminded the living of the transient nature of existence and the importance of preparing for the eternal. Every grave told a story of hardship overcome, of children loved and lost, of labor endured, of faith clung to in desperation. Life and death were inseparable partners, teaching humility, respect, and gratitude for the fleeting moments of joy. Reflecting on the entirety of medieval life, one sees a journey defined by courage and perseverance. From the fragile first breath to the quiet last sigh, life was a series of battles against disease, hunger, nature, and human cruelty. Yet within these battles were moments of love, laughter, creativity, and devotion. Children played despite the danger, lovers found solace in each other, and communities celebrated life amid suffering. Every life, no matter how brief, contributed to the enduring rhythm of the medieval world. In the end, the story of medieval life is a mirror. It shows us the fragility of existence, the power of resilience, and the enduring value of community, faith, and family. It reminds us that life is both fleeting and precious, that every act of survival is significant, and that even in the darkest times, hope, love, and courage endure.
And so, as we leave this world of thatched cottages, smoky hearths, and echoing church bells, we carry with us the legacy of those who lived, suffered, and thrived in the medieval era. Their journey from birth to death was not easy, but it was a testament to the human spirit, a story that still resonates, whispers, and inspires across centuries. Life in the medieval era was defined by labor, by the constant rhythm of work that began at dawn and ended only when the sun fell behind the horizon. Every person, from the lowliest peasant to the most powerful lord, was bound to a cycle of toil, responsibility, and survival. Work was not just a means to live, it was survival itself, a constant negotiation with hunger, weather, and fate. Peasants rose before the sun. They dressed in coarse wool or linen, shoes worn thin or absent entirely. Children, even at 5 or 6, helped carry water, herd animals, and gather firewood. Men plowed fields with heavy oxen, sowing seeds into stubborn soil. Women baked bread, churned butter, and tended gardens, often with infants strapped to their backs. The fields, huts, and cottages smelled of smoke, sweat, and livestock, a sensory reminder of the unending demands of life. The tools were simple but unforgiving. Wooden plows, sickles, and hoes were extensions of the body, each swing requiring strength, balance, and precision. Injuries were common, from cuts that festered to broken bones that never fully healed. There were no hospitals to treat these wounds, only local remedies, herbs, and the hope that pain would subside. Yet, despite hardship, work brought identity. Every successful harvest, every woven cloth, every filled granary was a triumph.
For townsfolk and artisans, life followed a slightly different rhythm, but it was no less grueling. Blacksmiths hammered iron from sunrise to sunset. Weavers managed looms with meticulous care, turning thread into cloth that would clothe families and enrich merchants. Apprentices learned skills under the harsh eyes of masters, enduring long hours, strict discipline, and frequent beatings. Skill was survival. Failure could mean hunger, shame, or displacement. Festivals, though rare, offered brief respite. Saints' days, harvest celebrations, and market fairs brought music, dance, and storytelling. Peasants and nobles alike gathered to share food, gossip, and laughter. These moments were fleeting, a brief escape from the daily grind, but they were vital. They reminded people that life was not just about survival, it was about connection, joy, and hope. Even in labor, danger was never far away. Fields could flood, livestock could die, and famine could stalk the village. Diseases spread quickly in crowded cottages, and a single illness could decimate families. Men could be conscripted into war at a moment's notice, leaving their work and households in jeopardy. Women often faced childbirth, which could be fatal, adding another layer of fear and urgency to daily life. Yet, amid this constant labor, medieval people displayed ingenuity, resilience,
and conserved what they had. Every meal was earned, every bite cherished, every harvest celebrated. Food was life, and life was fragile. Yet in its preparation, consumption, and sharing, humans found courage, ingenuity, and a daily reason to endure. Clothing in the medieval world was both a necessity and a signal of one's place in society. Every stitch, fabric, and color told a story of survival, labor, wealth, and status. To dress was to declare your role, your rank, and sometimes even your moral character, all without speaking a word. Peasants wore what they could afford and what they could make. Wool, linen, and leather dominated their wardrobes. A man's tunic might be patched from old garments, dyed in muted browns or grays from whatever plant or mud was available. Women's dresses were practical, long enough to cover legs and keep out dirt, yet simple enough to allow movement for work in the fields, hearth, or mill. Footwear was scarce. Many walked barefoot, toughening their feet against dirt, stones, and mud. Simple hats, hoods, or scarves protected against wind and rain. Every garment was functional first, frayed second, and occasionally cherished as a symbol of care or family.
Nobles, however, displayed wealth, power, and influence through clothing. Vibrant colors, imported silks, furs, and elaborate embroidery adorned their bodies. Velvet gowns, wide sleeves, ornate belts, and jeweled clasps marked rank. Men wore doublets, hose, and tunics trimmed with fur. Women wore gowns that dragged on the floor, adorned with gold threads and pearls. Fashion was a language. A stranger could immediately gauge social standing, profession, and even political allegiance just by looking at a person's attire. Children's clothing mirrored adults, but on a smaller scale. Peasant children wore hand-me-downs, often patched repeatedly. Noble children's garments were miniature versions of adult fashion, and their appearance reflected their family's wealth and connections. Clothes were taught as part of etiquette, How one dressed could dictate one's inclusion in festivals, church ceremonies, and social gatherings.
Clothing was also labor-intensive. Wool had to be sheared, spun, dyed, and woven. Linen required retting, combing, and weaving. Leather had to be tanned carefully. Dyeing, particularly in bright colors, demanded expensive ingredients: woad for blue, madder for red, saffron or imported plant extracts for yellows. Garments were valuable. They were repaired repeatedly and handed down. A hole, a stain, or a faded color could mark someone as poor, unlucky, or out of favor. Season dictated attire. Winter required layers, cloaks, and fur to endure frost. Rain demanded hoods and simple waterproof coverings, usually made from oiled leather or waxed cloth. Summer allowed lighter garments, but even then, sun, insects, and dust were constant companions. Medieval people understood the limits of comfort and protection. Clothing was armor against nature as much as society.
Fashion also served ritual, ceremony, and faith. Clergy wore robes of specific colors, indicating rank or season. Knights displayed surcoats with heraldic symbols over armor. Festival clothing, whether simple ribbons or ornate robes, communicated participation, status, and respect for tradition. Even mourning was signaled through clothing. Dark, plain, somber garments marked grief and signaled adherence to societal norms. Adornment carried meaning. Simple jewelry, brooches, belts, and rings could signify wealth, profession, marital status, or allegiance. Men might wear signet rings. Women might braid ribbons or pearls into hair. Clothing and accessories were tools for communication, silent yet powerful. They conveyed identity, morality, and societal expectation in ways words could not. In every thread and fabric, medieval life is visible. Clothing shows ingenuity and resourcefulness, revealing how humans adapted to climate, labor, and social structures. From tattered peasant tunics to silk-trimmed noble gowns, attire was never frivolous. It was survival, identity, and expression woven together, practical, symbolic, and sometimes beautiful in unexpected ways. Even in the harshest conditions, medieval people dressed with purpose. Each garment told a story of labor, of status, of ritual, and of survival. Clothes were not mere coverings, but tools, shields, and messages, connecting the wearer to community, nature, and the vast social tapestry of their world. Education in the medieval era was not a universal experience. For most, learning came not from books, but from life itself, from observing, imitating, and laboring. A peasant child learned geometry in the fields, arithmetic in counting livestock, and literacy through simple prayers. Knowledge was practical first, survival-driven always. For noble children, education was a path paved with tutors, manuscripts, and strict discipline. Boys learned Latin, history, and the art of war. Girls were instructed in reading, embroidery, and managing households. Learning was a social tool, a ladder to influence and power. In castles and manors, lessons took place in quiet chambers lit by flickering candlelight. Scribes copied texts painstakingly, illuminating manuscripts with gold leaf and vivid colors. Each letter was a treasure, each word a bridge to understanding the wider world. Monasteries were beacons of learning. Monks preserved texts from religious treatises to classical works, copying them by hand with meticulous care. The library, dimly lit and quiet, was a sanctuary of thought. For those few allowed inside, it was a doorway to ideas far beyond village life,
astronomy, philosophy, medicine, and theology. Knowledge was sacred, guarded jealously, and slow to travel. A single book could take months to create and years to circulate. Guilds also transmitted knowledge. Artisans and craftsmen passed their skills from master to apprentice, blending hands-on practice with theory. A blacksmith taught the properties of iron, the subtle ways of fire and hammer. A weaver demonstrated thread tension, dye absorption, and pattern creation. Learning was embodied, tactile, and continuous. Failure was a lesson written on calloused hands and scorched materials.
Universities began to emerge in the late medieval period. Places like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford gathered students from across Europe. There, Latin was the lingua franca, debate the primary tool of learning, and philosophy the guiding light. Students lived austere lives, hours of reading, memorizing, debating, and occasionally wandering the streets in search of knowledge, food, or conversation. Education was rigorous, demanding, and deeply intertwined with faith. Illiteracy was common. Most peasants never saw a written word beyond prayers or legal documents. Oral tradition carried stories, laws, and history. Songs, poems, and storytelling preserved cultural memory. Children learned legends of heroes, saints, and monsters, not from scrolls, but from the words of parents and village elders. Learning was communal, embedded in daily life, and essential to identity. Curiosity existed even where opportunity was scarce. A child might study the sky, noting the moon's phases or the flight of birds. A healer might experiment with herbs, learning their subtle effects. Knowledge was survival and innovation, a mix of observation, ritual, and tradition. Education also reinforced hierarchy. Those with knowledge wielded power. Those without obeyed. Clergy, scribes, and nobles controlled information, shaping society through literacy, record-keeping, and religious instruction. Learning was a key to authority, whether in the village, the court, or the monastery. Yet, even in a world of strict boundaries, learning was a form of freedom. The ability to read, calculate, or strategize offered agency. To understand the world beyond one's field, forge, or home was to glimpse possibilities that others could not see. Knowledge, whether practical or philosophical, became a tool of survival, ambition, and hope.
In medieval life, learning was a journey as perilous as any battlefield. Mistakes were costly, opportunity rare, but wisdom, once gained, carried power, protection, and sometimes immortality, preserved in manuscripts, tales, and the enduring memory of those who dared to seek it. Religion in the medieval era was not a separate part of life. It was life. Every action, thought, and choice was shadowed by faith, and every village, town, and city pulsed with the rhythms of the church. From birth to death, rituals marked existence, giving structure, comfort, and a sense of purpose in a world full of uncertainty. From the first cry of a newborn to the final breath of an elder, the Church's influence was ever present. Baptism was the first, urgent ritual. Families prayed over the swaddled infant, seeking protection from disease, death, and evil spirits. Without this rite, the soul was thought to be at risk, vulnerable
to forces beyond the human eye. The Church promised salvation, and in a world of plagues, wars, and famines, salvation was more valuable than gold. Daily life was structured by prayers, Mass, and holy days.
And adaptability. Crop rotation, herbal remedies, and architectural solutions like thatched roofs or stone bridges allowed communities to survive and thrive despite the relentless challenges of their world. Trades were passed down, skills perfected, and knowledge preserved through storytelling and apprenticeship. Life demanded endurance, but it also cultivated resourcefulness, creativity, and tenacity.
In this world, every day was a testament to human effort. Every meal earned, every roof repaired, every crop harvested was a victory. Work was not just a necessity, it was a bond between generations, a rhythm that connected past, present, and future. And it is through this labor, this ceaseless striving, that the medieval world persisted, survived, and created the foundation for the centuries to come. In the medieval era, food was more than sustenance. It was survival, celebration, and at times, terror. Daily meals were dictated by the seasons, the soil, and the unpredictable whims of nature. The peasant's table was humble, the noble's grand, yet both were bound to the uncertainties of harvests, weather, and disease. For peasants, breakfast was often simple: coarse bread dipped in ale or watered-down milk. Lunch might be pottage, a thick, watery stew of grains, vegetables, and occasionally meat or fish if fortune allowed. Dinner, the main meal, was modest but filling, often consisting of more pottage, bread, and perhaps cheese or eggs. Sweet treats were rare, reserved for festivals or special occasions, because sugar and honey were precious and expensive. The kitchen was a smoky, chaotic place. Fires burned constantly, the smell of burning peat or wood mingling with the aroma of cooking grains. Women stirred cauldrons, kneaded dough, churned butter, and tended pots of broth. Children hovered nearby, hoping for scraps or lessons in preparation, while livestock wandered close to the walls, sharing the warmth and, at times, the food. Sanitation was poor, and spoilage or contamination could turn a meal into danger.
Nobles and royalty experienced food differently. Feasts were extravagant, showcasing wealth, power, and hospitality. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, pies, bread, cheeses, and exotic spices imported from distant lands. Banquets were social theaters, filled with music, jesters, and elaborate etiquette. Yet even the lavish tables were at the mercy of the seasons and politics. A failed harvest could diminish the larder, forcing the aristocracy to ration or improvise. Famine was a constant threat. In years of poor harvest, drought, floods, or pestilence, the medieval population faced hunger with grim determination. Grain prices soared, bread became scarce, and hunger gnawed at bodies weakened by labor or disease. Children were especially vulnerable, their small bodies failing quickly without proper nourishment. Villages might resort to foraging, eating roots, acorns, or even resorting to desperate measures to survive. Some chroniclers whisper of cannibalism in extreme situations, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life. Yet food was also a source of community and celebration. Harvest festivals, Easter, Christmas, and Saints' Days brought tables laden with special foods, from roasted meats to sweetbreads. Villagers and nobles alike shared in songs, dances, and stories, as much as in bread and ale. These moments of abundance and festivity reminded everyone of what survival meant. Labor rewarded, community strengthened, and hope renewed. Preserving food was an art. Salting, smoking, drying, and fermenting were essential skills. Salted pork, smoked fish, pickled vegetables, and hard cheeses allowed people to survive winters when fresh food was scarce. Knowledge of herbs and roots also played a role, not only for flavor, but for medicinal purposes. Survival depended on careful planning, foresight, and the ability to adapt to nature's unpredictability.
In the medieval world, every meal told a story. It spoke of the seasons, the harvest, the skill of the cook, and the labor of those who tilled the land. Bread, the staff of life, carried the weight of human effort and endurance. Ale and wine were both nourishment and comfort. Meat was a rare luxury, a symbol of prosperity. And famine, lurking ever in the background, reminded everyone that nothing in life, not even food, could be taken for granted. The rhythm of eating, celebrating, and struggling against hunger was woven into every life. Food was survival, yes, but it was also culture, faith, and joy. It connected families, villages, and generations, leaving a legacy of resilience, creativity, and shared humanity. Even amid scarcity and suffering, meals became moments of endurance and togetherness, a reminder that life, however fragile, could still offer sustenance, warmth, and a fleeting taste of happiness. Life in the medieval era was not only shaped by work and survival, but also by the heartbeat of community, ritual, and celebration. Villages, towns, and cities thrived on the rhythm of festivals, church ceremonies, and shared experiences, which offered brief but vital respite from daily labor and the constant shadow of mortality. The church was the center of communal life. Its bells rang through villages, marking hours of prayer, celebrations, and warnings. Sundays were sacred, a day for Mass, reflection, and rest from toil. Even peasants, whose lives were otherwise dictated by the rising sun and the plow, paused to kneel on cold stone floors, hands clasped in devotion. Priests preached sermons that were both a warning and a guide, urging the faithful to obey God, avoid sin, and give alms to those in need. Faith was not merely spiritual, it was practical, intertwined with morality, law, and survival.
Holy days and saints' festivals punctuated the year. Easter brought pageantry, food, and music. Christmas offered warmth, ale, roasted meats, and the rare indulgence of sweets. May Day celebrations filled the village green with dancing around the maypole, songs and games for children and adults alike. Even the humblest peasant could escape the grind of labor for a few hours, joining in communal joy and laughter. These festivals reinforced bonds, reminded villagers of shared faith and fortune, and offered hope that life could be brighter than the daily struggle. Pilgrimages were another thread in communal and spiritual life. Men, women, and children traveled to shrines, holy wells, or distant churches, seeking cures for illness, blessings, or absolution of sins. The journey itself was perilous: long roads, bandits, fatigue, and exposure to the elements. Yet pilgrims returned with stories, relics, and renewed faith, enriching the village with new tales and shared devotion. Guilds and town communities shaped social structure in more urban settings. Craftsmen, merchants, and apprentices lived intertwined lives, relying on trust, skill, and mutual protection. Festivals for guilds honored patron saints, celebrated milestones, and provided competition for skills in weaving, smithing, or carpentry. Markets became hubs of not just of commerce, but of conversation, gossip, and the circulation of news, ideas, and human connection. Even daily chores had a communal aspect. Villagers helped one another with harvests, building projects, or caring for the sick. Shared labor created solidarity, while festivals and religious rituals reinforced moral codes and cultural identity. Laughter, storytelling, and music filled the gaps between struggle and survival. The medieval world, harsh as it was, relied on the strength of these bonds, for no individual could endure alone.
Conflict and tension, however, were never far. Lords, taxes, and feudal obligations shaped life with the constant pressure of authority. Disputes over land, livestock, or labor could erupt into violence. War brought soldiers to villages, taking men and resources, leaving families vulnerable. Festivals and faith offered relief, but they existed alongside fear, vigilance, and the knowledge that the next crisis could come at any moment. Music, storytelling, and dance were lifelines. Minstrels and bards traveled between towns and villages, recounting heroic tales, romances, or cautionary legends. Families shared stories at night, passing down wisdom, warning, and humor from one generation to the next. Festivals, processions, and plays gave life rhythm, imagination, and a sense of continuity beyond the immediate struggle for survival. Community life in the medieval era was therefore a delicate balance. Work and labor demanded endurance, faith demanded obedience, and celebration offered hope. These rituals, songs, and gatherings were not merely entertainment. They were survival tools, moral guidance, and emotional sustenance. The medieval individual existed as part of a web of family, faith, and community, each connection vital to enduring the challenges of disease, famine, and mortality. Through festivals, prayers, and shared labor, the people of the medieval world created meaning and joy, leaving behind a legacy of resilience, creativity, and communal spirit that echoed far beyond their own fragile lives. Even amid the constant presence of death, community offered life, full of laughter, music, ritual, and the enduring hope that tomorrow might be a little brighter.
Education in the medieval world was a privilege few could claim, and it took many forms depending on wealth, status, and geography. For the majority of peasants, learning was not measured in books or lessons, but in labor, observation, and oral tradition. Children absorbed knowledge as they worked alongside parents, tending fields, caring for animals, grinding grain, or weaving cloth. Survival itself became the curriculum, and every misstep carried a lesson that could mean life or death. In towns and among the wealthy, education was more formal. Boys and sometimes girls learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, often under the guidance of priests or tutors. Latin dominated scholarly instruction, for it was the language of the church, law, and administration. Memorization of prayers, psalms, and passages from Scripture was central, instilling faith as well as discipline. Noble children might practice etiquette, swordsmanship, music, and even diplomacy, preparing them for roles of leadership or courtly life. Apprenticeships were another crucial path. From around the age of 12 or 13, a child might be bound to a master craftsman, learning a trade such as blacksmithing, carpentry, weaving, or masonry. The apprentice's life was grueling. Early mornings, long hours, and strict obedience. Mistakes could mean punishment, but mastery brought skills that ensured livelihood and sometimes prosperity. For many, this hands-on learning replaced any formal schooling. The guilds, powerful associations of skilled workers, controlled knowledge and trade secrets. They dictated the progression from apprentice to journeyman to master,
creating a structured path for competence and reputation. Guilds also offered communal support. They cared for members in times of illness, provided guidance for orphans, and mediated disputes. In this way, education extended beyond books. It was a network of mentorship, discipline, and practical wisdom.
In rural areas, knowledge was practical and intertwined with tradition. Women learned herbal medicine, midwifery, cooking, and textile work. Men learned the cycles of agriculture, animal husbandry, and basic construction. Stories, songs, and oral history conveyed values, survival skills, and the collective memory of communities. Education was lived, experienced, and passed down through daily acts of labor and care. Even among the learned and elite, education was rigorous. Monastic schools and cathedral schools trained future clergy and scholars, teaching scripture, philosophy, and law. Manuscript copying preserved knowledge, and libraries became sanctuaries of thought. Some exceptional minds rose to produce poetry, chronicles, or treatises, shaping not only their immediate world, but the cultural legacy for generations to come. Skill building was never separate from life. Every plowed field, woven cloth, or forged tool reflected knowledge passed down, refined through labor and observation. Learning was active, physical, and communal. Mistakes were expensive, but mastery meant survival, respect, and sometimes influence. Education and skill were intertwined with the rhythms of life, the demands of work, and the necessity of preparation for an uncertain world. Through these lessons, apprenticeships, and traditions, medieval people built lives of resilience. They acquired not only tools and techniques, but also judgment, patience, and endurance. Knowledge was survival, skill was empowerment, and the act of learning, whether in a smoky kitchen, a bustling workshop, or a quiet monastery, shaped the trajectory of every life. Even in hardship, education offered hope. Each generation added to the collective wisdom, passing it forward like a lifeline. It ensured that despite famine, disease, and war, human ingenuity, labor, and perseverance endured, shaping a society where survival was intertwined with knowledge, skill, and the promise of mastery over both work and life itself. Marriage in the medieval world was rarely a simple matter of love. For most, it was a transaction, a necessity, and often a survival strategy. Families arranged unions to secure land, labor, alliances, or protection. Love, if it existed, was secondary to duty. And yet, within these practical arrangements, bonds sometimes grew strong, resilient, and deeply human. Peasant marriages were pragmatic. A father negotiated dowries, exchanged livestock, or promised portions of land. Sons and daughters were expected to marry early, sometimes in their mid-teens, so that households could grow and labor could be secured. A young woman learned to cook, weave, and manage a home before she even reached 18. A young man proved himself through hard work in fields or workshops, demonstrating readiness to provide and protect. These early unions were often the foundation of entire communities, connecting families in webs of mutual dependence. Noble marriages were even more calculated.
alliances between houses, claims to titles, and the consolidation of wealth dictated most matches. A noble child might be promised in marriage while still an infant, their future written in contracts and sealed with signatures and witnesses. Negotiations spanned months, sometimes years, with discussions of land, military support, and dowries. Love, romance, or attraction rarely played a central role, though historical records do hint at secret passions, quiet rebellions, and fleeting joys hidden behind ceremonial obligations.
Within marriage, relationships were complex. Husbands were expected to protect, provide, and enforce discipline. Wives managed households, raised children, and often controlled the daily economy of the home, from food to clothing to labor. Affection could blossom in shared hardship, tending fields side by side, enduring famine or surviving disease together. Yet tension was never far, as economic stress, social obligations, and the threat of illness or death created constant pressure. Parenthood was a central aspect of medieval family life. Children were both a blessing and a necessity. High infant mortality meant that each birth carried both joy and fear. Parents taught survival, labor, faith, and social rules from the earliest years. Boys learned to plow, hunt, fight, or craft. Girls learned cooking, sewing, childcare, and household management. Education was practical, moral, and relentless, designed to prepare the next generation for the harsh world that awaited them. In towns and villages, families relied on neighbors, forging networks of support, trade, and protection that were vital for survival. Courtship and social rituals also shaped relationships. Festivals, fairs, and church gatherings offered opportunities to meet potential spouses. Simple gestures, shared work, or playful teasing could ignite affection, even within arranged frameworks. Stories of secret meetings, exchanged letters, and whispered confessions remind us that medieval people experienced desire, longing, and human connection just as vividly as we do today. Love and loyalty were tested constantly. Wars, plagues, and economic pressures often separated families or claimed lives unexpectedly. Faith, rituals, and social obligations guided behavior, offering moral codes that dictated acceptable conduct and punished transgression. Yet even under strict rules, moments of tenderness, sacrifice, and devotion persisted, reminding us that medieval relationships were a blend of survival, duty, and the enduring capacity for human emotion.
Through marriage and family, medieval people created continuity. Children became heirs, workers, and future parents. Households endured through generations, passing down skills, stories, and values. Relationships were both pragmatic and deeply human, woven into the daily grind of labor, faith, and survival. Each bond, each household, was a microcosm of medieval society itself, fragile, enduring, and full of life, even under the shadow of mortality. Food in the medieval world was never taken for granted. Every meal was a negotiation with nature, weather, and circumstance. Peasant families relied on what they could grow, gather, or trade, while townspeople depended on markets, and nobles feasted on imported delicacies. Hunger was a constant threat, and abundance was fleeting. For peasants, the day began with porridge, often made from oats, barley, or rye. Sometimes it was thick and nourishing, other times thin and barely sustaining. Bread was a staple, coarse and dark, baked from grains that survived the season's weather. Vegetables were seasonal, foraging provided wild greens and herbs, and protein came from eggs, milk, cheese, or occasionally meat. Even small quantities of meat were rare and treasured, often reserved for festivals or special occasions. Noble tables were a stark contrast. Roasted meats, pies filled with spiced fillings, fish preserved in salt or smoked, imported spices and exotic fruits were abundant. Feasts could last hours, with courses served in sequence, each more lavish than the last. But luxury did not mean safety. Foodborne illness was common, preservation was difficult, and overindulgence could be fatal. Even the wealthy feared spoiled meat, contaminated water, and the threat of famine lurking beyond their walls. Famine struck with terrifying suddenness. A failed harvest, early frost, excessive rain, or locusts could decimate crops. In such times, families scavenged roots, boiled acorns, or ground bark into flour. Livestock might be slaughtered for last sustenance. Hunger left bodies weak, minds desperate, and communities on edge. Starvation was indiscriminate. Rich and poor alike felt its shadow, though the poor suffered more immediately.
Malnutrition brought disease. Fevers, infections, and plagues struck hardest among the undernourished. Children were especially vulnerable, and parents watched helplessly as the smallest, weakest members of their households succumbed first. Meals were as much about survival as nourishment. Every loaf, every egg, every sip of milk counted in the unspoken calculus of life and death. Meals were not merely physical sustenance. They were ritual, community, and comfort. Bread and ale shared among laborers reinforced bonds. Families gathered at hearths, sharing warmth and stories as they ate. Even in famine, moments of joy could arise. The first taste of a new harvest, the excitement of a festival meal, the small victory of a cooked chicken or a jar of honey. Food connected people to the land, the seasons, and one another. Cooking itself was a skill passed down through generations. Women mastered hearth fires, preserving techniques, brewing and baking. Men hunted, fished, and butchered animals with precision. Knowledge of edible plants, herbs, and fermentation was essential, and mistakes could be deadly. Each meal reflected experience, care, and adaptation to the harshness of the medieval environment. The threat of famine also shaped culture and society. Charitable acts, such as sharing grain or distributing bread to the poor, were not merely moral, but practical. Survival depended on community cohesion. Markets, fairs, and trade networks emerged to mediate scarcity. Lords monitored crops and tithes to prevent rebellion fueled by hunger. Religion intertwined with sustenance, as prayers for rain, bountiful harvests, and divine protection were daily necessities.
In every bite, medieval people tasted struggle and resilience. Every meal told a story of labor, climate, community, and endurance. Hunger sharpened minds, strengthened bonds, and inspired ingenuity. The act of feeding oneself and one's family was heroic, ritualistic, and intimate, a thread that connected the living to the land, to each other, and to the generations that would follow. Even in the shadow of famine, medieval people found ways to survive. They experimented with grains, hunted small game, gathered wild foods, and